Here we are. We're going to talk about compression today. It's one of your most widely used tools. You're going to use it on almost everything you do in every single song. So let's get into it and see what we can learn. We've got a snare track here. We've got the compressor open, and let's start with some presets. See what it sounds like and how it does different things. We've got the drum section open, and we're going to have a go at the snare drum section. And just play around with it, see how it changes the sound of things. So you can see right there that even just the presets does a massive variety of changes to what a snare sounds like. And so it's really good for you to dive into a compressor to see how does it work, what do all the dials do, what is this ratio, threshold, knee, input, gain, attack, all those things. So you can really start to fine tune the sound that you're going for on whatever the instrument, vocals, snare, bass guitar, whatever it is, how you can use this effectively to help you in your mixes. So let's take a moment now to just slow down, and I can teach you what these different things are. So let's zero this out back to default and jump into it. The first thing I want to talk to you about is this little blue ball right here. This is called your threshold, which is this knob right there. It goes up and down. And what that is the point at which the compressor is going to start working. So when your audio gets above that threshold line, which is currently set as negative 18.12 decibels, when it gets above that, the compressor is going to kick in and it's going to start to reduce your level. At this point, we have a ratio of 2:1. So for every 2 decibels that it goes above that threshold line, the compressor is going to say, nah, you're only going up 1 decibel. We could change that, let's say 4:1. Now for every 4 decibels that it goes above that threshold, the compressor says, no, you're only going up 1 decibel. So we can see that it's taking those loudest bits and it's squashing it down. It's compressing it, just as the name says. And so let's listen really quick. We can see that once the darker blue ball, which is the input audio, gets above that threshold, it starts to compress it. And right here, it's compressing it really hard. So we can open it a little bit, and it gives you a bit of an idea of what's happening. Yeah, so threshold, the point at which it starts to work. The ratio is how much it's compressing. The knee has to do with this curve right here. So it's called hard knee and soft knee. This would be a hard knee. You can see right there, the line goes up and immediately it goes at a 4:1 ratio. A soft knee extreme would be this, where you see there's not really a clearly defined place and point where that compression starts to hit. Like the hard knee was really sharp, really clearly defined. The soft knee feathers that out, so it's a little bit more smooth. Really handy in many different applications, but often you're just going to do something kind of in between that as a way to find that nice balance for your sound. So we'll show you what that looks like here. A hard knee, it's only when it gets above that threshold. Right? Now let's start to soften the knee. Watch this number right here change as I soften the knee. 1.97. See, as the knee gets harder, it's starting to compress lower down. Therefore, it's taking more of that sound out. So what's the difference between just doing a hard knee like this and lowering it down? Well, it kind of brings it in more gradually. Instead of a very sharp angle where the decibel before that there was no compression, the decibel after that there is compression, it kind of feathers it in smoothly and helps to make a more smooth kind of sound. And again, they're just different applications of the tool, so it's handy to know what's going on. Input gain is pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. It just turns up the input gain on it, which is really helpful because sometimes we want to take that volume and we want to push it up into the compressor. So if this is not hitting the compressor, which right now it is, I'll take the input gain down. If it's not hitting that compressor, but we want it to, then we can just take the input gain and force it with more volume up into that compressor. It's a really handy thing to do. You'll use it quite often as well. There's a misunderstanding of what a compressor does. A compressor compresses. It brings the loud bits down. It does nothing else. It's often confused when people will say the compressor, oh, that brings the quiet bits up, makes them louder. Actually, it doesn't. All it does is brings the loud bits quieter. But what that enables you to do is it enables you to turn the volume up. And since you've made the loud bits quieter, you turn the volume up, it means that the quiet stuff gets louder. So it's a byproduct of compression is that you can make the quiet bits louder. Let's watch. If we take that input down, you can hear the snare a little bit, but you can't hear too much background noise. We'll make it 0. But watch as we push the input gain up. It doesn't just make the loud stuff quieter. Because we've pushed the input gain in, we've actually made the quiet stuff louder as well. Which is really handy actually to help you get a sense of loudness without it actually being louder, because you're compressing it and you're taking away the loud stuff, but you're making everything else sound louder. So now the snare drum, where it had frequencies that weren't very loud, now they're actually much louder. And so it gives it a sense of being louder, a sense of having all frequencies a bit more present, which gives you the ability to sound loud without actually being loud. A little trick there for you. So that's the input gain, really handy. This is just called gain. It's the output gain. So after we've compressed it, we've done what we want, we can actually make that output louder. And so it's just taking that processed sound and boosting it. That's all it's doing. Very simple. Now here is where the attack and release is where you really get a lot of bread and butter with the compression. The attack is how fast the compressor starts to work. Right now it's set at 0.25 milliseconds ms. And that's just super quick. Basically, as soon as that blue ball gets in that threshold, bam, it's going to go on. It's going to start compressing. But if we soften that attack, we say put it at 40 milliseconds, the blue ball is going to get past the threshold, and then it's going to wait 40 milliseconds before it compresses. And so you have all this sonic information that's getting through and not being compressed before the compressor clamps down and starts to work. And so this is really helping to shape the color of the sound that you're trying to get, how you're creating that sonic footprint of this instrument or of this track. The attack is a really big part of that. Release also is a big part of that. The release is how long does it take for that to come back down. So here we go. We'll do a quick release. So this is attacking that snare straight away. And getting that snap at the very beginning and crunching that, but then opening back up after 9 milliseconds and letting everything else ring out really well. And so then if you push that input gain into the compressor, right, we're getting this massive gain reduction. But that's really only on that initial snap. We're not getting it on anything else. So let's listen to what happens. So you can hear now with a longer release how it compresses down and it holds and then releases. So the whole volume of everything after that snare hit also gets compressed, which we don't want on a snare drum. You might want on some vocals. There's different applications for this. And so this is a good way to shape your transients. They're called these guys right here. This is your transient. So at the beginning, if we've got, say, a zero attack, 0 milliseconds, right at the beginning, this is going to all be squished and all be compressed down. But if we take that to, say, 15 milliseconds, then perhaps it's going to be this part here that gets through and then clamping the rest. And so you can see how that would allow that quick snap of the snare drum to punch through, or the kick drum, or the bit of a low end in the vocals to come through before everything else is clamped down. So something to play around with, the attack, the release, to get comfortable with it, get used to it, and know how and when to apply those. It really is just going to be a thing of trial and error for yourself. Having a go, listening to what happens, doing some extremes with it, and then finding those mediums, those places where you're like, that sounds good. I like that. So you can get a lot of different coloration that can happen from a compressor to give you a lot of the sound that you're looking for. A compressor is going to be on every single song you do. One, because it also helps with volume control, which is an important part of your mix, is that you don't want your mix to just get blown out of the proportions, right? You want your quieter bits to be somewhat similar to your loudest bits. If you have a drummer who loves to get super heavy-handed during the choruses, but then during the verses is really, really gentle, you've got this huge dynamic range, which is often good, but then you're left with the listeners turning up their verses and turning down their choruses. And that's not really what we want. So we want to balance those out. And so our compression will help us to do that. It's one way to accomplish that. And so often with vocals, you can smooth out some of those peaks that they have to help it become more of a consistent singing dynamic and singing range. Another thing that you can do with compression is where we take an EQ and we put it in here, and we're going to listen to that, and we're just going to try to adjust this and make it sound a bit better. We don't want any of that low end stuff. So let's just play with something. That doesn't sound nice. We'll take some of that out. And we'll try to chop some there too, but we want that snap. So let's go a little bit extreme here. So we've compressed it. We've done it, taken out 9 dB. Which is doing quite a bit. And then we come through and put this EQ on. Which, let's just pretend that that's really helpful EQ. It's really not. But now you've got this big bump on the kind of lower mid-range, right? So if we take this and we put it before the compressor, you see how all of a sudden it takes those big frequencies that we shoved into it and it's just compressed it. And so you're getting that sound perhaps that you're really looking for, but as you listen to it, that sound it pokes through too much, but it's the frequencies you want. So we put it before the compressor so that way when it goes into the compressor, those frequencies are compressed as well, instead of just being left to freely dance wherever they want to go, right? So we often will put EQ before the compressor. It's almost always in my effects chain is I do EQ first and then compressor, and often I'll do another EQ after that and perhaps even a compressor after that. It's a good way to go after shaping your sound with an EQ and then using the compressor to make sure that there's no frequencies that are just kind of flying away within that, and to shape that. So another thing it can be really useful for is vocal reverb. So you introduce the reverb, and then after that reverb, in the chain effects chain, you put a compressor. So that way, again, any sort of random frequencies are not able to just fly off whatever they want. It's actually quite controlled, and you can shape that in just the way that you want it. So again, switch it down. Just sounds a little bit more smooth and controlled. So those are a few things you can do with the compression. I hope that was helpful. Enjoy, go practice, go mess around with it. Take it easy.